Whether it be celebrities, historical figures, or people who have made the headlines for a variety of reasons, each case is both fascinating and informative in equal measure, and today's is perhaps the most discussed story in history. Without being religious, it would be fair to say that the majority of the world's population, born current and ancient, will know the name of Jesus Christ. Born circa 6 to 4 BCE in Bethlehem, the story of Jesus has fascinated scholars, religious institutions, and believers in the faith for hundreds of years, ever since his death in 30 CE. The man himself was a religious leader revered in Christianity, one of the world's major religions, and is regarded by most Christians as the incarnation of God himself. His life, teachings, and miracles are the subject of the New Testament in the Bible and in Christology. The story of Jesus is told in various parts, but mainly focuses on his birth, adult years, and death by crucifixion, which is a main symbol within Christianity as it promotes the message that he died to absolve humanity of its sins. Though the story is told amongst churchgoers on a daily basis and is celebrated at certain points in the year, such as Easter and Christmas, the story of Jesus Christ is both harrowing and beautiful in various ways. In this episode, we will examine those final hours before he was sentenced to death, crucified, and eventually resurrected, and attempt to portray a somewhat condensed version of the events as they unfolded. How could such a miraculous figure be deceived and betrayed by his closest friend? What happened on the day of his death? And what lasting effect does this story have on humanity? Join us as we attempt to retell part of the greatest story ever told, here on The Last 24. In order to fully encapsulate the historical and biblical significance of Jesus, his story, and his teachings, it would take multiple episodes to do so. In keeping with the trend of this channel, we will move on to the end and begin with one of the most recognized events, the Last Supper. Something which has fascinated historians, artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, and even conspiracy theorists alike is the story of the Last Supper. The final meal that Jesus shared with his 12 apostles in Jerusalem before his crucifixion. The event is mentioned in all four of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, in the New Testament, and marks the beginning of the end of Jesus' life. During the meal, Jesus predicts that one of his apostles will betray him, and although he is not identified by Jesus himself, and despite protests by those in his presence, in Matthew chapter 26 verses 23 to 25, and John chapter 13 verses 26 to 27, Judas is specifically named as the person who will betray him. In the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus takes some bread and breaks it into pieces before offering it to his disciples. He declares, "This is my body, which is given for you." Afterwards, he offers them a cup to drink from, stating, "This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood." The exact wording and quotations have been translated and amended over the years and across various versions of the Bible, but the concept of the message remains the same. The Christian sacrament or ordinance of the Eucharist is based on the events that began with the Last Supper. Though the Gospel of John does not include the ritual of the bread and wine, most scholars believe that John chapter 6 verses 22 to 59, the bread of life discourse, had a Eucharistic character and echoes the narratives in the Synoptic Gospels. During the Last Supper, Jesus also claims that Peter will deny all knowledge of him a total of 3 times before a rooster crows the next morning. This prediction ultimately occurs on the day of the crucifixion, much to Peter's shock and consternation, resulting in him breaking down in tears. The discussion is relayed in all 4 Gospels and is specifically attributed during the Last Supper in both Luke and John. In Matthew and Mark, the prediction is made after the supper, during which Jesus announces to his followers that all of his disciples will eventually abandon him. Once the meal is over, Jesus is said to wash the feet of his disciples in the book of John, and in chapters 14 to 17 prepares them for his pending death through a long sermon. In modern slang, someone who is deceiving, conniving, or guilty of treason is often referred to as a Judas. and rightly so, when one reads the story of Jesus and the ultimate betrayal by one of his most loyal disciples. After the Last Supper, Jesus and his disciples head to the Garden of Gethsemane, situated at the front of the Mount of Olives in East Jerusalem. It is here that Jesus finds peace and solace as he contemplates what is ahead of him. He prays intermittently and passionately to God to give him the strength to cope with his upcoming trial. Every so often he checks on his disciples, who have fallen asleep and fail to keep watch. It is then that an armed mob arrive, who have been sent by chief priests and elders, alongside Judas, who has come to betray him. The traitor had previously informed the mob that he would identify Jesus by kissing him. This occurs in Matthew chapter 26 verse 50, where a fight breaks out amongst the two sides and an unnamed disciple uses a sword to cut off the ear of a man in the crowd. Jesus immediately puts a stop to his men's defense of him and accepts his fate willingly, reiterating that this is all part of God's plan and was predicted years before he was born. The Gospel accounts differ to the trials of Jesus. In Matthew chapter 26 verse 57, Mark chapter 14 verse 53, and Luke chapter 22 verse 54, Jesus is taken to the house of the high priest, Caiaphas, where he is ridiculed and beaten. Then the chief priests and scribes lead Jesus away into their council. However, in John chapter 18 verses 12 to 14, it is stated that Jesus is first taken to Annas, Caiaphas' father-in-law, and then to the high priest. Regardless of the varying testimonies, it is then written that he is escorted to the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate. After being interrogated by Pilate, he cannot justify grounds to punish Jesus and sends him to King Herod Antipas, who was ruler of Galilee and Perea at the time. Again, Jesus is questioned, and like Pilate, Herod cannot find any fault in Jesus, and so returns him to Pilate for further interrogation and public consideration. Throughout the ordeal, Jesus rarely speaks. In Mark chapter 14 verse 61, the high priest asks Jesus, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Jesus replies, "I am," and then predicts the coming of the Son of Man. This angers Caiaphas, to which he rips off his robe and accuses Jesus of blasphemy. Pontius Pilate is tasked with laying blame and condemning Jesus for specific crimes such as subverting the nation, opposing the payment of tribute, claiming to be a king, and most especially claiming to be the Son of God. In John chapter 18 verse 36, Jesus states, "My kingdom is not from this world," but does not deny being the king of the Jews. Unable to understand or comprehend the magnitude of the situation, Pilate parades Jesus in front of the gathering crowds and asks them to observe the Passover feast, whereby he will allow one prisoner, chosen by the crowd, to be released. Their choice is a man called Barabbas, who Matthew refers to as a notorious prisoner, and that Mark and Luke describe as one of the numerous insurrections against the Roman power, or Jesus. After careful persuasion and encouragement by the elders, the crowd decide to release Barabbas and to crucify Jesus. Pilate briefly pleads to the crowd, saying that he finds no malice in him. They persist by chanting, "Crucify him." Surrendering to the presence of the horde, Pilate writes a sign in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek that reads, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews," which is attached to the top of the cross that is being prepared for Jesus. He is tormented, spat on, and has a crown of thorns placed upon his head before being marched away by guards to be crucified. The crucifixion itself has been the subject of multiple depictions in both film and art. Many will recall the controversial 2004 epic, The Passion of the Christ, directed by Mel Gibson, or the 1951 painting Christ of St. John of the Cross by Salvador Dali. No matter how it is portrayed, the crucifixion of Jesus is perhaps the most harrowing, brutal, and heart-wrenching part of the New Testament, where Pilate has Jesus mercilessly flogged, beaten, and mocked as he drags the cross towards Calvary. The route traditionally thought to have been taken is known as the Via Dolorosa. Whilst en route, it is said in Mark chapter 15 verse 21 that the guards force a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, to assist in carrying Jesus' cross with him. Eventually they arrive at Golgotha, taken from Latin calva, bad head or skull. the cranium-shaped hill in ancient Jerusalem where the soldiers nailed Jesus to the cross and erected for everyone to see him. On both sides of Jesus are two convicted thieves who are also being crucified. In Matthew and Mark, both thieves mock Jesus as they too endure their slow death. In Luke, the story is slightly different, with one of the thieves criticizing Jesus while the other defends him. Jesus tells the latter, "Today you will be with me in paradise." There is also a group of women mentioned in all four Gospels who are in attendance at the crucifixion. Many believe they are disciples of Jesus. However, in the book of John, Jesus sees his mother Mary in the crowd and asks his followers to look after her. It is also written that he observes his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Historians and scholars have argued on the length of time Jesus was on the cross before he died. The general consensus was that he suffered for approximately 6 hours before he passed. During those agonizing hours, Jesus continued to show love and mercy, even to those who had wronged him and nailed him to the cross. In Luke chapter 23, verse 24, he pleads with God, asking him to forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And yet, despite his pleas to the Almighty Creator for clemency on those who tortured, mocked, and mistreated him, they continue to taunt Jesus, demanding that, if he is indeed the Son of God, that he save himself and come down from the cross immediately. They laugh at his misery and throw things at him as the hours go on. Finally, at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Jesus looks to the heavens and shouts, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This is depicted in the book of Mark. In Luke chapter 23, verse 46, he says, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And in John chapter 19, verse 30, he states, "It is finished." It is then that Jesus Christ died on the cross and is taken into heaven. In John chapter 19, verses 33 to 34, Roman soldiers are said to have broken the legs of two thieves to accelerate their demise, but do not do so to Jesus, as he is already dead. One of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a blade, where blood and water pours from the wound. In the immediate aftermath of his death, the curtain of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem splits in two from top to bottom, and the earth shakes, with rocks splitting and tombs breaking open. In both Mark chapter 15, verse 39, and Matthew chapter 27, verse 54, a centurion who observes the spectacle proclaims, "Surely this man was the Son of God," to which the crowd and guards are shocked. When all was said and done, Joseph of Arimathea is granted permission by Pontius Pilate to remove Jesus' body from the cross, and alongside Nicodemus, wraps him in a clean cloth and buries him in a nearby tomb. The following day, Pilate orders Jewish priests to seal the entrance of the tomb with a large stone. And so this was the last days and hours of Jesus Christ as described in the Gospels. However, it wasn't the end of the story, as a new miracle was about to unfold. Though they do not describe the actual physical manifestation of Jesus' resurrection, all four Gospels depict Mary Magdalene as she visits the tomb on the Sunday morning, 3 days after Jesus died and was placed there, to find that the stone had been rolled away and the tomb is now empty. Depending on which account one reads, there are angels present who explain that Jesus is no longer buried and that he is risen from the dead. In Mark and Matthew, the angel also instructs those present to tell disciples to meet Jesus in Galilee. Matthew describes that Roman guards who were meant to oversee security at the tomb report what has happened to the priests of Jerusalem. The priests then bribed them to say that the disciples stole Jesus' body during the night. The resurrection of Jesus Christ is the cornerstone of Christian faith and was predicted in the Old Testament and by Christ himself throughout his discussions with his disciples in the New Testament. Following his return, he is seen in many infallible proofs to a variety of people and in numerous locations over the course of 40 days, and demonstrates that he has cleansed the guilt of our past and assures humanity of its salvation. On that note, it is probably best fitting that we bring this episode of The Last 24 to a close. In today's world, religion is portrayed in the news and social circles in numerous ways, some good, some bad. Indeed, religion has been the cause and subject of numerous wars, killings, and protests over the years, and unfortunately, this shows no sign of ending. However, one does not need to be religious or hold a deep-rooted faith in Jesus Christ to understand his message, which is one of love, grace, and a free offer of eternal life. To gain an understanding of Christ can be somewhat difficult in a world where its people, no matter what religion, have much more in common than they think, but choose to segregate and distort the teachings of their ancient beliefs. Jesus Christ is not exclusive to Christianity. Indeed, he is mentioned in other religions such as Sikhism and Islam, although he is believed to be a prophet as opposed to the actual Son of God. In any case, the last 24 hours of Jesus' life is traumatic yet liberating, heartbreaking yet passionate, and is definitely worthy of consideration for a number of reasons. We hope you enjoyed this episode, folks. Take care, and we will see you next time.